Hello, welcome to Meet the Expert. This is our monthly deep dive into a topic with someone that knows a lot about what they're talking about. I'm Angela Cripps, the MD of the recruiting gym. This is Glenn Martin, and he might say that he's not an expert. I definitely do. Glenn, how are you today?
I'm really good, Angela. Thank you so much again for inviting me on to Meet the Expert. As I said, this is the hat trick. This is the three, right?
It is. So we had you on the daily workout when we did a whole week of hiring with values and human-centered hiring. And then we had you on Ask the Coach. So questions came in based around that. And we realized there's so much to this topic. So we wanted to get you on Meet the Expert. So we've timed it so it coincides with a long project that you've been putting together and gathering lots of data on. So you'll be able to share lots of information on that. But for those that don't know you, that didn't see you on the other two, if you could give us a short intro, that would be great.
Of course, of course. So, hi, I'm Glenn. I'm the founder and CEO of Nevermind the Job Spec, and we are a talent solutions business. Essentially, we work and partner with pre-seed to Series A funded startups in any industry sector, because we love the startup space, and we partner with them, shall I say, on a kind of project retained or trained basis. I'm not too sure about trained because it does sound mildly patronizing. What it is an ideation session to help them develop ideas to, essentially implement their own human-centered hiring framework and approach. So yeah, that's us. We've been around for roughly about 2 years now. So we're a startup ourselves. So startup working with startups.
Fantastic. And I've learned something already, or maybe I need to just clarify, but ideation session to me sounds like the old brainstorming. But is that
So
similar?
yeah, I mean, ultimately, Angela, it is ideas. Yeah, I mean, so it's that we've designed this session, this workshop, based on this, human centered design principles, and it is there to generate, to your point, ideas, but actionable ideas. Because you and I both know it's one thing to have a load of ideas, which sounds great, and everybody comes away feeling really, really great about it. But if there's no owners and no actions, then it just remains an idea.
Definitely, definitely. So give us a little background then about what you're going to share with us today.
For sure, for sure. So I think, I mean, you introduced it perfectly. We've been talking about kind of values-based hiring through the previous two kind of recruited gym sessions, and I think I'm going to put it out there. Historically, I think values-based hiring has been largely subjective. So a leadership team, a company hiring manager knows what the company values are, and they go into an interview to kind of litmus test the interviewee's alignment with those values. But it's very subjective. And I think because it's subjective, you have one interviewer approaching it in one way, another interviewer interpreting it a different way. So you don't really get a consistent evaluation of that alignment of values in the interviewee with the company's values. And in certainly the hiring space now, actually having data to make informed decisions around hiring is super important. So I just wanted to kind of zoom in a little bit more on how we've approached values-based evaluation. So I'm not saying this is the gold standard. I'm not saying this is the only way, but this is a way that we've approached it, and we've found it's been really successful.
Brilliant, brilliant. So we're going to work through this example that
Yeah.
you've got, and you're going to be sharing some of the key elements. And you're happy if I've got questions, or if anyone's got questions, feel free
Fire
to,
away.
yeah, put them in the
Fire
chat.
away.
I can see people over on LinkedIn. Say hello over on LinkedIn. If you're there, feel free to join us on
Yeah.
Crowdcast. I'm monitoring the comments over there as well. So yeah, if you have a question or if you want to say anything, feel free to comment. Okay.
Yeah.
If you want to
Let's
share
go for
your
it.
screen, let's.
Yeah, 100%. Because as I said on the kind of LinkedIn post this morning, I think it's really important. And I'm a very visual person, and I like to kind of offer information for people to return to after the session. So I put together this Notion page which everybody can have access to. Super happy to share it in the comments towards the end of the session, and hopefully this will help us, act as as a bit of a guide for this session. So let's ensure
That's
everybody
fantastic,
can.
because there is a lot of information here. We don't expect you to take it all in at once. These are
Yeah,
recorded.
exactly.
You can always come back, watch it again. You can click on the green button here in Crowdcast and it will take you to the 41. This is number 41 of sessions
Yeah,
like this with all these different experts, different topics. Wonderful.
definitely.
Right, let's dive
So
in.
let's kickstart with a graphic, because it pretty much gives a kind of visual illustration of what I'm going to talk about there. So this is the bit of context setter. So this is, how do we get to a point of values-based evaluation? And we recognized probably a good couple of years, 2.5 years ago, that kind of recruitment as a whole, largely a lot of the processes or the procedures or the the end-to-end recruitment frameworks and the tooling that sits behind that as well, so obviously the ATS, etc., was very much based on the principles of user-centered design. So there's, as you can see with the Venn diagram on the left-hand side, the information needed to meet the user's needs and the business goal. So in the context of recruitment, the information is CV, application, users being either the talent acquisition individual or the hiring manager, and the business goal was to make a hire. So it's quite a linear and very narrow kind of scope for that particular solution and approach. We started to delve into other approaches of designing end-to-end recruitment processes and what that would mean for the people involved in it. I discovered human-centered design. So it kind of went down a rabbit hole of understanding what human-centered design actually was, what the principles were. I'm not a designer. So for me, it was an approach where, could this be applicable to recruitment and hiring? And the principles of human-centered design are, first and foremost, very human. Empathy. Empathy is a kind of leading and guiding principle. Creativity, which you might think creativity within recruitment. Well, yeah, let me convince you of that. And then the business needs. So you'll notice within that, it doesn't actually specifically focus on a user, because human-centered design is based on all of the user's needs. So that's the candidate, that is the talent acquisition individual, that is the hiring manager, that is the team that person is going to be hired into. And one step even further, which is it also considers, if you're in a company, who is the end customer of that company. Wow. So it's a very holistic approach to design, which considers all of those users' needs to differing degrees, of course, because ultimately there are differing degrees of need within that. But it's that holistic business need and all of the stakeholders within it. But it's coming from an approach of very much empathetic to the human need and, promoting creativity. So from that, and based on that, we arrive at human-centered hiring, which is essentially the fusion, as it said there, positive candidate experience, talent brand advocacy, and values-based evaluation. So you'll see on the right-hand side there, this is the piece that we're gonna really hone in on. But human-centered hiring is very much those three pieces: candidate experience, which I think a lot of talent acquisition individuals are clearly knowledgeable about. Talent brand advocacy, I've found to differing degrees, people's understanding and knowledge of that. And then obviously values-based evaluation. So that kind of brings us to that piece around values.
Yeah, and I think if recruiters or TAs were honest, they don't consider all of those parties when they're looking at the process. They'll definitely consider the candidate, how much weight gets put on that. But to be able to take it to that next level, for me, it was the candidate, the hiring manager, and the team. But then to take it even further to their customers, I certainly have never even considered that, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that are watching that haven't either. So that's phenomenal. And the creativity part that you said, I think we are a creative industry because we're
I
all
agree.
about
Yeah,
solutions, aren't we? We're always trying
absolutely.
to find a new way, and we embrace new things, whether it's new tech
Huh?
or new ideas. I think, yeah, we're one of the industries that are open to that, and we have some
Yeah,
wonderful creative people in there. So, yeah,
100%.
definitely.
100%. And I think, so just to kind of hone in just on the talent brand advocacy piece, I think sometimes people confuse that with employee value proposition, and it's not that
Right.
at all. But the talent brand advocacy, again, is really about that particular, and it links intimately to the candidate experience, but to the values based evaluation. And I think just kind of moving us a little bit further forward. And this is probably just a little bit more of a quick overview. So if you haven't done a kind of a values based project before, um, it's something you will do as a talent acquisition individual. It's not daunting. It's not massively complex. It can be very simplistic. You can start with one value. One value is all you need. A well-defined one value is all you need. And I just provide a little bit of an overview there of our values project. So essentially, you just start with a couple of clear mission statements around, kind of what that particular project is aimed at achieving. So with us, it was like growth through a continuous journey of shared self-discovery and mutual understanding, and then collaboration and communication as a foundational element to achieving the vision of that particular business. And then the end result is essentially a set of values that are not just words. And the reason this is applicable is because this process can be applied to every company. It's about actually establishing those values to begin with, to be able to then evaluate them. But the key piece here is equally, once you have that value, you do need to define what it means. So, case in point there, transparency. Unlock the door to gaining trust with transparency. We believe is obviously key to establishing strong relationships, which, if you think in a business context, both internally and externally, is very key. And we make sure that our commitment to honesty and openness is always a priority. So again, you're talking about an action there. So you're talking about what you want to achieve, but equally an action. And this is the difference between values in motion and values in action, which I'll come to next. But I think if anybody's kind of interested in kind of learning how to approach that particular values-based workshop and project, super happy to chat about that. We touched upon it at the beginning in terms of an ideation session. Ideation session as a kind of format can be used for a number of different things. It can be used to discover values. It can be used to discover talent acquisition objectives. It can be used from a people and culture point of view. It's very applicable to all of those. So hopefully I'm not going at too much of a fast pace.
No, I think it's really helpful, and just as that reminder around the values piece, because I think most companies will have their values, but it's what do they really mean, and how do they relate to the job, and how can people show those values and live those values within the company. I love putting in induction programs as part of their probation that they have to share an example of each of the values and how they've lived them. So right from the beginning, they're given that, and therefore they're always thinking about, okay, what does that mean and how does that relate to me? Because that's what customers need to see. That's what internal customers need to see, not just words on a wall.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the process of going through a kind of values-based project is super useful. It's not only for the kind of people and talent team, obviously for the leadership team as well. It's kind of critical that everybody has a shared interest and input into what the values of that particular company are and how they will be interpreted. What that looks like from the point of view of an activity, a kind of real world application of that particular value. Because to your point, it's not enough to just say, oh, we're super transparent, write it on a wall, and then essentially that's all that happens. It's like, oh yeah, that's one of our values. It's on a wall. The key is taking that to the next level where it's actually something that people can identify in one another when they're seeing and collaborating, interacting with each other on a day-to-day basis. So that kind of brings us to this piece here, which is what is values-based evaluation? And it sort of states here, look, very simple terms, the process of assessing an individual candidates based on their values and how these are aligned to the company's values. And we've broken this down into kind of two categories, essentially. The first one is values in motion. So it's a kind of predicted or future actions. So involves evaluating candidates not only based on their past behaviors, but also on their potential future actions. Now, if you think about that in the context of a kind of a review, well, actually, if you think about it in the context of kind of almost like an employee evaluation, and you start to, weave that into an employee evaluation, whether that's quarterly or yearly, what you're analyzing then is kind of scenarios where that particular individual is going to be applying those values, and actually that can be a kind of assessed as an endpoint. So okay, I intend to be more transparent on the project that I'm actually going into next, both internally and externally, and you can then assess that on the other side, which is values in action. So it's not enough to just say, okay, this is a value, we've seen it in action, that is the piece that we're going to assess. We need to understand how people are going to be thinking about applying these values in future scenarios, because actually that will inform their decision making, that how they interact with people, what they're going to deliver, etc. So I think values in motion is something that I would say is to a degree more qualitative than quantitative, but is equally valuable.
I was just thinking that around the qualitative bit, that wouldn't it be lovely to highlight an employee of the month based on a values based criteria, as to highlight someone that's really lived the values that month, because we get a lot of highest biller, and that doesn't apply to everyone in the business, but best showing of values, company values in their work, relates to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think kind of individuals that are displaying the values of the company are really adding to the culture, the environment, and they are fostering and advocating for positive behaviors, which again feed into that kind of culture, that environment. And I think it to your point, sometimes it's almost like, kind of, is there as much credibility in sort of highlighting somebody that's lived a value over the course of a month compared to somebody that's generated revenue? I think we are kind of predicated to focus on the revenue side of things, but actually the values has equal amounts of kind of impact to you as a business. And that's not to say that person couldn't win the highest biller award the following month or something along those lines. But by highlighting that, you're highlighting that, yes, revenue is important, but equally our culture, our environment, the way that we're working is equally important. And I think sometimes, kind of that as a success metric and success criteria is often overlooked, if I'm honest. It's seen as a bit of a nice to have.
Yeah, I mean, it's very rarely put in there at all. So I'm so glad we're highlighting it, because that is really important for people to think about that.
Yeah. And ultimately, the reason it's not highlighted is because sometimes there's no metrics behind it. So then it feels a lot more kind of like subjective, fluffy, is the words I've heard before. Values can be quite fluffy, quite subjective, and how do we? It's not as credible as revenue. Well, it depends on how you approach it, right? So that brings us to values in actions, which is obviously beyond the theoretical. It's beyond kind of values in motion. It's very much around an assessment framework that focuses on, assessing, observing and understanding a candidate's actual behaviors and actions in their daily lives. So we need to bring them into that kind of almost live environment, and get them interacting with colleagues, or ultimately, kind of trying to understand how they make decisions, their adherence to, as it says there, to kind of ethical standards, which does bring us into, okay, so how does this bake into the actual hiring process? So this is where we start to get into the actual data point and the piece around how do we actually extrapolate out data points and quantitative kind of information against values. So if we take into account we've defined the values, we have them, we've defined them. Now we're looking to put them into a scoring criteria and an assessment framework to actually really be able to get data points out of them. So at the kind of pre-screening interview stage, I mean, it's almost a kind of funnel-based scenario. The pre-interview stage or first stage interview, I like the funnel to be really wide, quite open in terms of the type of information that we're gonna collate. So this is why we start with very open questions, because the aim is to really understand, one, how does the interviewee define a value? Do they have an understanding of what values are to them personally? Have they gone through a process of defining their own personal and professional values, or is this something they're still exploring? Because you need to take that into account, right? If somebody's not fully informed in terms of what values are and how they could be applied, then to assess them on it would be quite unfair. So we need to understand. We almost need to get a kind of baseline in terms of their understanding of what is a value, but equally, what do they need from us as a company in relation to values. So as it says there, open questions like, what core values would you look for in a company? Super easy. And it opens up a conversation.
Definitely. I've got a page of questions to give out to candidates based on, like, a first interview, but based on what their values are. So even if they're not sure, they could look down the list and go, oh, I'd want to know that question. And it gives you an idea of what the value is that would be important to that. So you can go either way. You either know your value, ask a question, or vice versa. I don't think I can attach things on here. So I'm just going to put my email in here. If anyone wants that document, great to give out to candidates as part of your briefing. I'll be able to stick it and attach it in the LinkedIn Live though. Right, just want to dive in with that.
Yeah, 100%. And look, I will say with these type of open questions as well, the capability of the interviewer is really important here. The idea is not to ask an open question and then just jot down all of the information that the candidate, the interview, is sharing with you. The idea is to really kind of shape and guide that particular kind of conversation interaction, so you do understand, you do answer those questions. Do they understand what a value is? Kind of have they looked at our values, so that they have a sense of who we are, what we're talking about, and then equally, what is their expectation based on that? And you can then, if I just stop sharing this and click over to another screen. So for that question, what core values would you look for in a company? I'm just going to flip over to this screen now, and I will make this larger. So this is really simplified, but actually I think it helps to illustrate what we're looking for here. Is you've asked that question, what core values would you look for in a company? You have your scoring criteria here. You have your definitions here. So you're starting to break down, okay, one, what is the depth of their answer? What's the reference points that they're talking about? What's the knowledge sources that they're actually kind of utilizing? So you're starting to probe into that through this particular question, this really open question. And then each definition gives you an allocated score. Then you move into the next criteria piece here, which is defining. Are they able to define their values? Can they talk to you about what their values are? Do they have one core value, two or three? What's the level of detail they can articulate that particular value? And then equally moving into, do they understand how values impact what they do, both personally, professionally? And then the fourth piece, which is slightly off the screen there, but we'll move over to it, which is, how do their values support better collaboration and teamwork? So you're starting now from this really open question to get not only sort of specific definitions, but you're allocating a weighted score to that. So obviously along the bottom here, you can put a score in for each one, and you get an average score for that particular question. So
I
we've
think,
started. We
yeah,
have a data point now and a structure where we can say, okay, X scored, a kind of an average of 3.5 on this question, and our scoring criteria from 1 to 5, our scale means that 3.5 is allocated to this particular definition. And if you repeat that with a number of different questions at pre-screening interview stage, you're starting to collate data points.
I think there'll be a lot of people that will be surprised at the amount of information that goes behind one question. So whenever you're working with sort of either competency-based questions or values-based, as it is here, that framework behind it to really identify, it's not about gut feeling at this point. It is about what they're actually saying and how they're utilizing it. But to be able to then identify a score based around that, and it's a values based score, I think that's phenomenal. So there'll be some people here with their jaws open going, what? I never knew about this.
Well, this is the point, Angela. As I said just before we came into this bit, now we're talking about the skill of the interviewer, right? You've got to be a really great interviewer to be able to keep the cadence of that particular conversation interaction going whilst being mindful of these particular sort of pillars that you're assessing, drilling down, sensing and hearing the opportunities to drill down on detail, ask questions in a different way. Because oftentimes if, you ask a question like, what is your one personal value? Somebody might be like, I don't know, I'm honest. Okay, well, what does honesty mean to you? So you're layering and exploring that question in so many different ways to try and draw down that detail so that you can accurately fill in this particular scoring matrix. It can't just be, oh, that sounds like a 3, or that sounds like a 4, or that could be a 2. You've got to really understand the scoring matrix to then apply that in the interview. And you've got to be a skilled interviewer to do that. You have. It's as simple as that for me. So I'll move back to the other screen unless there's any questions about this.
Well, the other best practice way is to have a purist observer. So when I run assessment centres, this is what we're doing. We have the competency and we'll have the levels and the framework, and therefore you're then identifying based on that evidence. But it's not having to do the two at the same time. So you'll have the interviewer, and then you'll have the purist observer, and the interviewer will also know. And what's great is we can record the interviews now. So whether if you are face to face, obviously get the permission for that. We're used to it on Zoom if it's happening that way, but ideally face to face. But by having that purist observer, they can just go with the evidence. They're not going to get swayed by the conversation and what you think they might have said or what you think they might have meant. No, you go with what they're actually saying and what they're actually doing. But again, 100%. Any client meeting, you would always try and have two. One take the notes, one keep the conversation going. So it's the same again, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's again that kind of scoring criteria that I showed there. There's a hyperlink to the G sheet in the Notion page, so somebody people can go through and kind of access that as well. But again, this is so if you think about it, Angela, this is just the pre-screening interview stage, right? This is the first point, and you can see now already how much kind of work's gone into just that first stage and what you're trying to understand. And that is really, again, classed as the kind of values in motion piece, because at the moment you're not assessing them in action. It's still values in motion at this stage. So then we move on to the next stage. Now, in-person assessment. Now, I say ideally in person because I appreciate that kind of with geographically dispersed teams, a lot is done virtually, and this can be applicable in the virtual environment. We've experienced, I think, increased results and observations in person, but it's certainly not impossible to do it virtually. But the in-person, kind of assessment stage is either kind of panel-based interview, which you just kind of refer to there, 2 or 3 people, based on a real-world case study. So, and I can't emphasize this enough, companies that kind of give out, kind of case studies where you have to present and it's just kind of like a theoretical thing or a hypothetical thing. So it has limited or no value. It has limited or no value, genuinely, because it's not a real world scenario. So by virtue of sending somebody something super hypothetical, how could you possibly base a hiring decision on that if you're looking to try and understand how they might operate in a real world scenario? I know it's often challenging and difficult to think of the ways to do that because obviously it comes with data, sensitivity, IP, etc. But you've got to get it as close to a real world scenario as possible. Or the example that I'm going to be talking about is, kind of getting individuals in it more of a kind of an assessment center scenario. We called them kind of recruitment open days because there were a lot more than just an assessment center, but both are kind of applicable. So essentially during this phase, you're looking to one, kind of socialize the company's core values with the interviewee. Now, people might be like, well, surely they've read the website, so they know what our values are. That's completely different to socializing the core values with these individuals and then assessing the interviewee's alignment with the company's values. So at this point, the socializing of the values is going to be you inputting time in a particular interview process where you might think, what are we getting out of this? It's like half an hour, 45 minutes, or that we're not immediately learning anything. Because the idea behind socializing the values is to either do a kind of one-to-one session. You and I, you would come on and talk through the company's values, kind of get my thoughts on those values, trying to understand how I think about the definition of those values. Are we aligned? And how I might apply those in a real world scenario. So again, that's quite qualitative. And oftentimes we're not really looking to extrapolate out information about the interviewee at that stage. What we're looking to do is give an offer and find out if those definitions are aligned. So that is socializing the values. It often works better as a group because you get that kind of internal kind of debate and conversation around the values and how they could be applied in a real world scenario. And then you move into the phase of assessing the values. So this is values in action. And I've taken an example here of an interactive assessment called Collaboration that we did quite successfully. And I'm hoping that everybody can still see this. Yeah, cool. We flicked over. So this assessment was a paired assessment. So essentially we've got two kind of attendees, two interviewees to collaborate on an idea map to illustrate all the things that they would need to consider in a specific scenario. And the scenario was, how would you approach working with a new team member that has recently joined the team? Now, this is interactive because it's a whiteboard scenario. So it's quite literally you as a facilitator, you or I as facilitators, Angela, we would be, okay, that's the scenario. That's the kind of problem statement, if you will. You've got to generate 5 key factors that you believe will deliver a positive experience and approach for that new team member between you. And then you let them go and ideate on the board and start to sort of outline exactly the sort of ideas. You see the interactions with them, and you're assessing all of this. Now, as a facilitator, and as you well know, any good facilitator needs prompts. So if you can see that they're perhaps getting slightly stuck on an idea, or they're kind of repeating the same idea and trying to re-engineer it, we provide these prompts for each of the scoring criteria that we're looking to try and understand. And again, you can click through all of these. But behind this particular scenario and this particular interactive assessment is the scoring criteria. Again, we're looking, did they agree roles and expectations between both of them when they started this particular exercise? And you can start to add scores to that. In terms of their communication, what was their communication like, both in terms of between each other and how they were thinking about communication in relation to the scenario of the new team member, their overall kind of collaborative approach. Again, feedback and recognition, thinking about that new team member, how are they setting that kind of feedback and kind of recognition cycle up? and then their participant interaction overall, how many ideas are they implement or offering to this particular scenario, and then obviously their focus on team outcomes. So whilst they're focusing specifically on a new team member, are they thinking about that new team member in the context of the wider team? So again, what you've got is a really very detailed kind of interactive assessment that you can start to draw out more information about their values alignment. And ultimately, the collaboration could be transparency, it could be inclusion, it could be a number of different things. But this was just an example that we had some really great results and good fun with
what
as
I love
part of the process.
Is that it helps with the process, but actually this isn't just an initial part, because all of the criteria that you've got there, wherever they land, so when we're hiring people, we'd normally look for average, so we want average and above rather than below, and therefore wherever they land, they can see the next level up, they can see what else they could be doing, and therefore automatically it's a training plan for them moving forwards for the next 6 months, maybe a year, to develop them. So, okay, this is where you landed, but let's look at the next level. Okay, how can we make sure that you have the skills, the ability, the attitude to be able to do that? And it might be that they have and they didn't get to show it, and you're like, great, okay, well, you're going to get the chance to show it. So until we actually see you doing it, it's not necessarily that we're going to take your word for it, but then you're just going to move faster through your training program, and we'll be able to move up to the next level. So things like that, it's not about the one result, is it? It's when you create something like this, you want to get 2, 3, 4, 5 results out of it. How can you use this?
Exactly that. And to your point, I mean, just one thing to detail here: when you have this kind of scoring matrix and all of these definitions, just imagine the quality of the feedback that you can offer an individual when you get to the end of the process. You know what I mean? It's kind of almost like, the quality of the actual feedback. I can stop sharing this now. The quality of the actual feedback enhances massively because you've really assessed on those particular. So whilst we've given it examples in isolation there, when you start to put them together as an overall matrix for your values, which are one thing I'd love to share, but I can't because of the data sensitivity, you have essentially a values-based data dashboard with data points on it that you can point to and be like, this person indexes X on transparency value, it indexes Y on collaboration value, it indexes Y or Z on active listening. And then you build that up to a point where this person is values aligned and would make a great hire. And then you add that to skills-based assessment, and you have this combination of a holistic view of the person that actually you can make an informed, data-driven hiring decision. The great thing about values is because values feed into motivation, motivation feeds into productivity, it then builds as a foundation for the next stage of their almost their internal career pathway assessment. So what we've started to do now is use this information we've taken for the hiring process and feed that into essentially people's career pathways, assessment plans, etc. Within once they join as an employee, and that's a whole other section right there. But I just wanted to kind of illustrate where.
But it's there; it's right there to be utilised, and what a great thing to have for your succession planning. So to actually see where someone is on transparency and on their values, if you're going to promote them to a manager, straight away you can identify, well, what are going to be areas that as a manager compared to maybe being a recruiter, because it is a very different job, and we get caught so many times promoting the best recruiter to manager. No, this type of information would give you a much better indicator as to whether they're going to be a good leader and manager.
It is. I mean, it's let's say when you start to see that real kind of like complete values data dashboard, it gives you such confidence in the hiring decisions that you're going to make, and actually the actual genuine values alignment of that particular individual. And it feeds into their motivation, it feeds into their productivity. You can start to bake that into their internal kind of monthly, quarterly, annual kind of evaluations. And it's real, it's tangible. They're data points that you can track through the course of their journey, their career journey with you. And I genuinely, I'm so confident it adds value to the hiring process. So
Well,
yeah, we're a
we've
big
got away
advocate
from
for it.
woolly very quickly, haven't we? So that's
Well,
probably
yeah, I'd like to think so. I'd like to think so. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
showing all that data behind it, all those criterion references, all of the uh, my brain's gone dead. The levels.
Yeah, yeah,
What's it called when you have a framework, the competency framework, but values-based framework to
yep.
be able to identify all of that. It then becomes very practical, and it's not about woolly. So those of you that have maybe thought, oh no, it's not for me, and I was in a big discussion last week around skills-based interviewing, and they were sort of split half and half. And of course, we want to make sure they can do the job, but surely it's more important to make sure they're going to be a great employee that's going to work well, that's going to learn, that's going to develop. And pretty much all jobs you can train, yeah, in some way, shape, or
100%.
form.
I've
None of
just
us can do them when we're born.
Yeah, I've just dropped that Notion page into the chat channel there, so it's free to everybody to kind of access and stuff like that. But yeah, hopefully, like you said, I'm pleased you said that we've gone from woolly and subjective to very much data driven, quantitative and qualitative. And there's so much you can do within it, and it creates such a fantastic candidate experience for the individual. And that's one of the key things of human-centered hiring. So you can see that kind of feedback loop really, which is great.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, we've got a couple of minutes. If anyone's got a question, I'm monitoring the comments over on LinkedIn because they don't always show up. I go back later once it's finished, and then all of a sudden there's all comments there, and it's like, well, they weren't there on what I was watching. So I'm hoping it's updating. Yeah. So if you've got a question or a query, because my comments, I've just put that link in there. That hasn't showed up on there either. So I'm not convinced, which is why we always do the link to Crowdcast to come over here if you want to as well.
100%. I think I was kind of actually blown away by how much talking I did there. I thought it would be a lot shorter.
No, well, that's the thing. Once you get into it, you realise there is a lot to this. So you've got Glenn's LinkedIn link there. So if this is something that you're thinking of learning more about, then obviously reach out to him. If you've got a company where you know this is so needed, just give us an indication how long it took to put that together for a company.
Wow. So the process that we took, the actual full project end to end was 9 months. But actually designing that framework, that took, well, the initial design of the framework took 5 days, and then we tested it in a live environment. So we iterated as we went. So we deployed it in the first kind of recruitment open day. Then we analyzed, tested, iterated, changed, deployed it for the second one. So we were continually refining based on the data we were collating to, one, generate a better candidate experience, but two, identify and generate other data outputs that we discovered once we actually had it running live. So once the design was done, we're continually looking at what we can learn from that particular approach and process, and how we can develop the framework. So then it becomes almost like an iterative process. So it could be your first phase of hiring, the framework looks like X, you learn the outputs, and then your second phase of hiring. So you're continually developing that. It's not just a static framework.
Yeah. But I suppose once you've got to this point at 9 months, that now is probably working fabulously for that company.
Oh yeah, for sure. Trust me, it's kind of the kind of feedback that we got for the attendees around how we'd approach the values side of things, even the stuff that they experienced and they knew and it was evident, against the stuff that we were assessing that was kind of not visible to them based on the scoring criteria. They loved it, absolutely loved it. I mean, the feedback that we got like a NPS score for all of the recruitment days, averaged at like, I think it was like 9. Yeah, it was 9, definitely. Yeah, 9. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and that's candidates. You never get
Yeah,
that, do you? When
yeah.
they're really happy with the
Well,
process, whether they got the job or not.
exactly. The fact that they were inclined to actually respond to the survey is always a
Yes,
good sign, right?
that's a
Yeah.
starting point. But usually they go, right, yeah, I want to say something. And you get a lot of the negatives because people are then prompted to do that, less so for the positive. So I'm so pleased for that. Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for showing people what's behind a great recruitment process and the
Thanks, Paul. Thanks,
data-driven
Paul.
hiring with values. This is where we should be, everyone. So if you're not in this space, if you haven't heard about this, go back, click on the link, go and have a look at all of the data and the information. And if it's something you need support with, then please do feel free to reach out to Glenn. Definitely don't come to me because you've probably all you've got through this is little Snapply who kept interrupting all the time. So snoring. Oh yeah, butter wouldn't melt now. Look. So hopefully he hasn't been too much of a distraction as I'm in a different place, cat sitting at the moment. But yeah, my two dogs are with me. Wonderful. Loved that, Glenn. Thank you so much. And
Thank you, Angela. Really
okay,
appreciate it.
we'll let you rest for a little while, but we're definitely getting you back on Ask the Coach at some point this year.
Appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank
All
you.
the best, mate.
Bye-bye.
Take care.